if you really want a good experience, you'll go to 10 Forward and eat chocolate. Like that. Tell me that isn't one of the greatest scenes in Star Trek history.
Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 82, recorded February 2023. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we detect a Star Trek fan on the sensors, we scan them with our tricorders, and we try to figure out why we all love this show so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 82. If you wish to get in touch with us, you could reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Spoiler warning, we may mention any episode of the Star Trek at any time, including episodes that were released even after this show was recorded. You have been warned, Human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the faithfully friendly, fickle, and fearsome, yet fully fabulous M5 Multitronic unit.
The M5 is ready.
Show me the housekeeping and the announcements, M5.
Information on viewer.
This is an independent podcast. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is just to follow us wherever you're getting your audio. We are on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. Another way to show your support is to make a donation to our official charity here on the show. That's the Children's Fund for Glycogen Storage Disease. A donation helps as they are doing some tremendous research to cure this terrible genetic condition. I talked about this a lot in episode 34 of the show, so if you're able and if you'd like, please head over to trekprofiles.com/donate and you'll see the link there. It goes directly to the charity. I'll also put a link in the show notes. Thank you so much. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. During this episode, you're going to discover that my guest Jamie McGregor is a huge fan of Sammy Davis Jr., and we talk quite a bit about Sammy and the bonus material and a little bit in the episode. And if you go to our show notes page up at trekprofiles.com, you will discover links to some playlists that have been selected for you, and we have those on Amazon, Apple, and YouTube and Spotify. So head over there and get some Sammy on. You'll enjoy it. I guarantee it. At the end of every episode, my guest will face my Kobayashi Maru lightning round. They will get 5 terrible multiple-choice Star Trek questions, and they must give us their answer. After each episode drops, I tweet those questions out as polls, where you can have your say. Let's look at the questions and answers from episode 80 with Brad LeBaron and see how it went. Which of these Chateau Picard vintages is your favorite? 2234, 2294, or 2305? Brad picked the 2305, but it was narrowly beaten by the 2294 in the online poll by 47 to 46%. The 2234 was judged to be a sour mead and received only 7%. What are we stealing from Daystrom Station? The Genesis device, the Thalaron generator, or the attack tribble? Brad is stealing the Thalaron generator, but that was in last place in the online poll at 17%. The attack tribble was in second place at 31, and the Genesis device got 52. Genesis! Which duty assignment would be worse, the Titan A or the Enterprise B? Brad picked the Titan A, but the Enterprise B was picked in the online poll by 65 to 35%. You are Captain Shaw's mess attendant. He asks you to bring him a small snack. What do we bring him? String cheese, kettle corn, goldfish crackers, or turkey jerky? Brad said turkey jerky, but the online poll said no and selected the goldfish crackers at 33%. Jerky was in second place at 29%, and kettle corn and string cheese each got 19%. Let's visit Metalis Prime. Where to first? District 6, District 7, or District 8? Brad wanted those District 8 vibes, but District 7 was the clear winner online with 67%. District 6 was in second at 22%, and almost no one at all wanted District 8 with only 11%. Now, if you enjoyed those questions and would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion in the show, send them to me at feedback@trekprofiles.com or DM me on Twitter. And in fact, some portions of the Kobayashi Maru questions in this very episode were submitted by listener Adam Saunders. I thank Adam for his contributions to the show. Okay, in the mailbag, I have one small little piece of feedback from listener Sandy. She noticed that I changed the spoiler warning in my show to say that I could talk about any episode of Star Trek at any time, including ones that were released even after the podcast was recorded, and how could that be? Sandy, this is an easy one, honestly. Episode 81, the one just before this, was an example. I made a Moopsie reference in the closing bit of the podcast, even though the episode was recorded before the Lower Decks with Moopsie had even been released. So I had to broaden out that spoiler warning, and I just decided to spoiler everything. So anyway, there you go. Thank you for the email. All right, that's it for announcements. Let's get to it. Roll it, M5.
Commencing interview transmission.
His favorite regular is that wily businessman Quark. His favorite guest is that singing holodeck crooner Vic Fontaine. His favorite ship is the 1701D. That's no A, B, or C. He's originally from Sydney, Australia, but now from Denver, Colorado, North America, Earth, in Sector 001. It's Jamie McGregor. Welcome, Jamie, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, John. Thank you for having me on. Great to chat to you.
So I feel like we should disclose up front that we actually know each other and
in real life.
In real life meet space, we've hung out several times. I don't know if that will influence our recording or not, but nevertheless, it's a delight to have you on Trek Profiles and to talk to you about this stuff.
Absolutely. And having long conversations with you about stuff is a lot of fun. So I don't care if anyone's listening. Let's just enjoy the next little while and we'll chat about things.
The M5 is a harsh taskmaster, and he demands I ask question one, which is, Jamie McGregor, are you a Star Trek fan?
I am. Otherwise, we probably would have never met. So
True enough. But there's plenty of Star Trek fans I haven't met that are out there. So I guess the question is, when did you first become aware of a thing called Star Trek?
I think probably around 95, 96, mid-teens. I think I ended up at a point in, as many children do, when they discover that they can actually stay up late even once the rest of the family has gone to bed, and they can probably watch TV without anyone knowing. And back in the mid-90s, Star Trek on Australian television was treated very poorly. And by that, I mean it was on random days. It was not necessarily shown in order. Different, they were a couple of years behind the US in distribution, and it was kind of put on at like 10:45 at night. And that's kind of where I came across it. And I watched it, and I was kind of like, oh, this is pretty good. And then I was interested in watching more of it. And you can go down to your local Blockbuster equivalent in Australia, which was called Video Easy, and you can go and get all of the episodes of what you've missed out on, and all of a sudden, pretty much soon after that, I'm watching First Contact 4 or 5 times in the cinema, and it's all downhill from there, I think, pretty much.
What's the first episode you remember?
Well, to be fair, the absolute first this is going to sound a bit weird. The absolute first episode I can remember is when I was like 5 years old. I went to a Montessori preschool, and I distinctly recall a voyage home. Like they had like a cassette thing where you read the book and you listen to it on cassette, and at the ding you turn the page, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember that because it was about whales, and it was about saving the whales, and it had to do with space, but I didn't really understand how space and the whales got together, but it was cool. Anyway, I kept returning back and back and back to that. But anyway, that was when I was 5. I can't remember once I got into things, really the first episode that I watched at that particular point once I started getting into Trek. But weirdly, I do remember the Voyage Home cassette and booklet when I was 5. So there you go.
What series was it that you started watching, if you remember that?
Probably TNG, I think, and which would have quickly merged into DS9. So I was never one of, because I was coming to this kind of late in the mid-90s, because basically everything was now on VHS at the local store. I could kind of pick and choose whatever I wanted really out of TNG, TOS, and DS9, and it wasn't until Voyager actually launched. When did Voyager launch? 95? 95, 96, something like that. So,
yeah.
So that's about the time that Voyager was starting as well. So really, it wasn't really a process of moving from one series to another with me. It was kind of like I got to pick whatever I wanted at any time, and that was a lot of fun. So I basically just got an opportunity to watch as much as I wanted of the different shows, as long as you selected 8 cassettes, because you get a discount for that. So, it was always 8 cassettes and you're away.
You are going to the Video Easy in Australia. You're taking out the cassettes. How much they charge you for a rental?
I don't know, but can I tell you the most frustrating thing about it?
Tell me.
So the way that it worked, I don't know what it was like in the US, but the way that it worked was they would have the distributor in Australia would release one a month. So on the certain day of a month, you would get 2 episodes of Voyager and 2 episodes of DS9, and they would have the cover remain on the shelves, and you had to see behind the cover to see whether or not the actual cassette was there. And with no other way, you would have to. It would be a race between me and any other Star Trek fan in the neighborhood to knowing when this particular release day was to go into the store and get that. And I can't tell you how many times I walked into that store, looked behind the thing, and was like, "Damn it! When is someone going to return this?" And you'd have to just keep going back. You just have to keep going back until all of a sudden one day it would be there, and you'd be like, "Oh, great! I've got 2 episodes to watch." So that was certainly an experience no one will ever have for the rest of time.
I actually had this discussion with another guest. I don't know. No, I think that episode already dropped. I don't know if you heard my one with Rob Hedrick that I just released, but one of the things
I've heard half of it.
One of the things we were talking about is those of us who were around and watching whatever version of Trek prior to the streaming era, it was just a very different experience when you had to watch those shows that were selected for you, or you got on video cassette, and that's it. That's what you got. Now in the streaming era where everything's available all the time, it's just a very different experience.
Yes. What I did with it was pretty much, my family started to work out that why am I going to Video Easy 5 times a week to try and find this XYZ? Because this was now a special kind of occasion, I kind of got my family watching as well. So I got my sister into it, got my folks into it. So if I would kind of return, I'd be like holding the video cassette as a kind of prize above my head and be like, right, okay, everyone sit down. We've got 24 hours to watch these 2 episodes. And I never really made the rest of my family watch every single episode of Trek, but certainly the new stuff that was being released in the late 90s, they got to see most of that along with me, which was great because it's wonderful to share Star Trek with your families.
That's a great memory. So you're watching Trek with your family, and you're watching it on VHS tapes. You probably missed a couple episodes there, here and there, maybe, and so when did you get all caught up?
I know when I finally finished and became a completionist in inverted commas, however sad that may be, was because Enterprise I really tried to get into and just couldn't. And I watched that. That actually was a different experience because it aired more on Australian television at an actual reasonable time, closer to when it was actually airing in the US, and it was on a more regular basis. And I watched the first half of the first season, and I'll be honest, even as big a fan as I was kind of like, I'm not sure I'm getting this. And I saw most of the episodes then over the next 10 years. And when I went to Las Vegas in 2017, I went, you know what? I really need to finish Enterprise, and I did an Enterprise kind of I worked out which ones I hadn't yet seen, and I did a full watch of those episodes at that point. And it was at that point that I was done. I was up to date. So that was that point.
Okay, so that's good to know. So let's see if we can figure out what actually caused you to do your first Star Trek convention in 2017. Was that your first, or was that just?
It was my second. So I had been to one convention in Australia in 2001. Now, Australia didn't...
And how was that?
A lot of fun. Australia didn't get really that much in the way of conventions, and there's a kind of stigma attached to it a little bit. We would get like one person would come, Kate Mulgrew would come, or Brent Spiner came in 1998, and I looked at the price tag and went, oh, okay, well, I won't be going to that. For whatever reason, I'd kind of left school, was at university, had a little bit of more disposable income on this occasion, and went to, it was called Holodiction was the name of the Australian company that ran them. They ran them for about 10 years, from like the mid-90s to mid-2000s. Fascinating story about the Australian convention scene and the official fan club of Australia, the official Star Trek fan club of Australia. There's intrigue and mystery, and someone wrote a master's thesis on the effect of corporate companies clamping down on local community fan organizations and that kind of stuff. Anyway, it's an interesting story about how that all came about.
I'll try to find some links to that, and I'll put it up on the show notes page.
Okay, yeah. I mean, basically, the story was some people were part of like a volunteer fan group, and then they secretly kind of did a deal with Paramount and then formed their own official one, and then used cease and desist to basically stop all of the other fan organizations existing, and then they started this convention circuit. So the one I went to in 2001 was great. Bob Picardo was there, Garrett Wong, Roxanne Dawson, the two Klingons, J.G. Hertzler and Robert O'Reilly, and Tim Russ was there with his band, who genuinely rocked the joint. Like they were phenomenal. They
are seriously rock and roll guys. Yeah,
absolutely. And so I went to that. There's a lot of science fiction convention stuff in Australia, but I was never really a broad science fiction or genre fan. It was really, Star Trek was my interest, and they kind of petered out. And I don't believe they've really had any Star Trek conventions in Australia since the mid-2000s. So yes, it wasn't until 2017 that I went to another Star Trek convention. So 16 years later.
Where were you living in 2016? Were you living here in the U.S. and decided to go?
No, definitely in Australia. So I only moved to the States in 2019. So
you decided to come to the U.S. all the way from Australia just to come to a Star Trek convention?
I did. That is correct.
That's quite a financial commitment.
Your question is why? Is that right?
So no, I want to hear what convinced you. What was the thing where you said, man, I got to do this. I got to spend all my quatloos on that.
It was the DS9 documentary. So the DS9 documentary launched in about March of that year. Mm-hmm. And I had mentioned that my sister was a Star Trek fan as well. And we saw this online and we're like, oh, this is cool. And there was a Vic Fontaine dinner that was being put on as part of the documentary. You've already mentioned that he's one of my favorite characters. I'll get into that a bit later. It was not affordable, shall I say. That's the nicest way I could put about the Vic Fontaine dinner. However, they did have a much more, still expensive, but a much more feasible pre-Vegas documentary dinner. And you would go to the Vegas convention, and then they would have a dinner at the convention. Mm-hmm. And we kind of looked at it and went, wouldn't it be a great idea if we could go? Yeah, of course we'll go to Las Vegas and go to a Star Trek convention that goes for 5 days, and we'll go to this dinner and we'll do all of this kind of stuff. And it's kind of like, we finished it and we never talk about it again. Anyway, 2 days later we're like, yeah, about that convention. What do you it wasn't. I think it was a couple of conversations before we realized, are we actually going to do this? And in the end we went, well, if we don't book it now, someone else will take it. So we just went, bugger it, we'll do it. So that was that. And then, as it turned out, James Darren was at the dinner that we were at. And so I got the Vic Fontaine experience I was after, and it was phenomenal. Right. So, really enjoyed that convention, and we had a great time. And then we're like, oh, this is good. This is a lot of fun. We might do this again next year. Anyway, that, as you would be aware, that's the way conventions can be. If you go and have a good time, all of a sudden you find yourself going, maybe I should do this again.
I was talking to someone who works in another area of vacations, and this was a guy who actually does my job for a cruise company. And he was saying that all their marketing money is really about selling one cruise.
Right.
Because once you go on the first one, you're coming back. Like, the numbers of repeat guests are enormous. It's enormous. And they just got to get you to take that first one, and that's all the marketing money is into that, and I think conventions are the same way.
Now, John, you know this story, so I will just suggest that was a very clever lead. But as you may know, when we did come back next year, I entered the competition to go on the Trek cruise, something which I would have never, ever, 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 ever done in a million years. And won.
So wait, hold on. Before we get to that, what was the contest?
The contest was,
who was running it?
It was just the cruise had a booth at the convention.
Okay.
And you just had to write your name down and walk on, basically. And on the last day of the convention, on the Facebook, one of the Facebook posts was, congratulations to Jamie McGregor. And I was like, holy smokes, there's another person named Jamie McGregor. And then it very slowly dawned on me, hang on, this could actually be me. And not only that, but how the hell am I going to afford to fly to Florida? Like, it's on the other side of the bloody world. So, but I wasn't going to look a free cruise in the gift horse of the mouth of that description. So I made it there. And to your point, you go on one. Maybe, and then they get you hooked. So they made their, let's just say, they made their money back from giving me the first one for free. Put it that way.
I know your delightful sister, Lyrian, so I just want to bring her into this conversation tangentially for a second, and just to say, how did you tell her that she was now going on this cruise with you that you had won for free?
Well, she was sitting next to me when I looked at when I was looking at it on my phone, and I'm like,
I see.
Have a look at this and tell me what you think. Because, yeah, I mean, this is part of the issue from my perspective was I don't know, or at least in Australia, I didn't know too many Star Trek fans, it just wasn't, wasn't necessarily a thing. I wasn't necessarily ashamed of it. It just there weren't other people I knew that enjoyed it. So it's kind of been something that we've kind of had as something that we a shared interest between the two of us, which is great thing to have. It's been something that's been a lot of fun for us to have some good experiences over the years, and I've really appreciated that.
So you've been on several of the cruises now, and you've been to several of the conventions. I'd like your thoughts on comparing and contrasting those two experiences. How are they similar and how are they different?
Convention versus cruise, is that what you mean?
I mean, I will tell you right up front, I believe they're very different experiences, but I'm not going to say much more than that. I'm curious as to what you think.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget the cruise is part actual holiday. You stop at certain places, you get off and you can go do things on land, whereas our experience of the convention was, this is tough. Like, actually walking around a convention thing for 4 days straight, trying not to miss everything, to go to everything you want to see, that is work. That is not a holiday. That is, you finish in Vegas every day. Well, I remember the first time we went, we would get to like 6 o'clock at night and go, yikes, we haven't eaten the whole day. You would just lose track of time and what you're doing. Whereas, so I think there is a difference there. Certainly the cruise is far more relaxing. The thing that I like about the way that they run the cruise is there are a lot more opportunities for the cast to do things and be involved in activities that are a lot of fun, that are not just them sitting in a chair telling the same story that they told last year. And I think that is what makes the cruise a really different kind of experience, because you've got game shows, they create opportunities for those cast members to do things that interest them. Anthony Rapp runs a D&D session, those kind of things. Will Wheaton comes on, guess what we're doing? We're doing Jeopardy on the ship. So those kind of things, the opportunities that they provide the actors to be themselves and do things that are more interesting than just, autographs, photo opportunities and interviews. And let's just say that the interviewing standard in Vegas can be variable depending on which person you get. I find it, it's a different experience.
I think they're very different experiences. And one of the things I think that happened to me on the cruise that I don't think would happen at a convention, especially the way they're managed these days, is I was at one of the DJ parties and it was Evan Goria was up there spinning records, and everybody's dancing like idiots, having a great time, including me. And I look over and there's my friend Rebecca dancing with Nana, like 3 feet next to me, just like rocking out.
Yes.
It's just like, that is not stuff you will see at these conventions, where like everything outside of the official events is just tightly controlled. This is where the talent is. This is where the people are, and there's no lines in between, unless you're paying for the meet and greet. It's much more casual.
It depends on the actor. I mean, John Billingsley spends most of his time out with everyone else, the entire cruise. A couple of the others, I'm fairly sure, go to a secluded area and just, take a few deep breaths every now and again, as they are very much entitled to do. Yeah,
Billingsley was not doing that. He was like out on the promenade partying with everybody else. And you could easily run across one of the actors sitting at some bar somewhere, just like having a good time. So I like the more casual aspect of the cruise. But as we were talking about, I think in the pre-show, the price is getting a little outrageous. So we'll see We'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
So you started going to the cruise, you started going to the convention, you became a completionist. Now I have to call you out, Jamie McGregor.
Feel free.
So the last time we were on the cruise together, you presented me with a custom Trek Profiles t-shirt, and I discovered that between you and your sister, you have some sort of weird t-shirt game going on. So tell me what's going on with your custom t-shirt cosplay game.
This is our way of doing cosplay without doing cosplay. I've never really gotten into cosplay. Nothing against it. It's just not something that I've kind of done. Maybe one day I'd love, get a uniform, do something like that. But so we like putting together kind of custom designs for one-off t-shirts. We're not selling them on the internet or anything. It's just little designs that either no one would know it had any Trek relevance, or it's extremely Trek, and people who know Trek will know why it's interesting or funny or cool or something like that. So we do a little bit of that, which has been fun. I think the best story I can tell about that, and this was awesome, was I had an idea for a t-shirt design that had the Rat Pack on it, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and a fourth face being Vic Fontaine, done in the style of the poster for Ocean's 11, which was the Rat Pack movie back in the 60s. And it had a very stylized structure with I think it was Angie Dickinson, it was Peter Lawford, I think might have been in it as well. And the idea was, no offense to the large contingent of Peter Lawford aficionados out there, ditch Peter Lawford and put in Vic Fontaine, right? So we did this design up, and Lyria, my sister, made the image kind of work in the same style as the other three, and we had a bunch of t-shirts made, and we went to that dinner that I was talking about, the DS9 dinner before the Vegas convention, and Ira Stephen Bear was there, and we gave him a t-shirt of this, and he loved it, and he said, "This is awesome, this is so good." He said, "I'm going to wear this tomorrow," and we were like, "Sure, you're just being nice, you're very kind." Anyway, the next day, we were sitting there in the huge auditorium for the DS9 panel, and out walks Ira Bear with the T-shirt on. And
nice.
We were like, how good's this? We gave this to him yesterday, and he's wearing it on stage. And, if you didn't know anything about Star Trek or know anything about the Rat Pack, really, you would have no idea what this T-shirt was,
you have to have a couple of fandom cards and that have a Venn diagram that
the Venn diagram is very thin. Yes, it's exactly right. It's a very, very small Venn diagram segment. Guess who else is in that Venn diagram segment? James Darren. So James Darren, being there, saw the T-shirt and said, "How do I get one of these?" And he spoke to us later and said, I want a few of these. So fast forward 12 months, we returned the next year to the Vegas convention with like 10 of these T-shirts. And I think this is the first time in recorded Star Trek convention history the talent was handing money back to us. So he paid for the T-shirts. So he's sitting there at his table, and he paid us for the T-shirt creation. Don't worry, we gave him a hefty discount, and he got all of these. He wanted to give them to his family, and he thought it was family and friends, and he thought they were fantastic. So, man, that was kind of cool to have that happen. So, it was a nice design, and we've got a few coming for this year's cruise as well.
Please do send me those images. I will be happy to put them up on Trek Profiles so my listeners can go see what these designs look like.
I'll give you the photo of Ira on the stage wearing the T-shirt.
Absolutely. Let's do that. So now that we're going to conventions, and roughly around the same time in 2017, we enter the new streaming era of Star Trek, and you're up to date on all of that, I assume? Been watching it all?
I am, yes.
Okay, so you've seen all the Trek that has been.
All the Trek that has been, and just like you, given time of recording, hanging out for Picard Season 3. Can't wait. It's a couple of weeks away at this point, and I'm very excited.
So you've also been on more than just Trek Profiles as a podcaster. You've been a semi-regular on several different programs. What got you into being a Star Trek podcaster?
Well, I used to have my own podcast, funnily enough, about Formula One car racing. I had a podcast for 10 years from 2005 to 2015 on Formula One. And
that's early days.
Run with a friend of mine. man, let me tell you, we got shut down. You know what I was talking earlier about how Paramount or whoever it was, Viacom, shut down these fan sites. We got shut down by Formula One, and it was the saddest day because we had a little niche. The podcast was going pretty well, I got to say, and just as podcasting kind of really went mainstream, we were sidelined. But anyway, that's a tale of woe for another day. And so I'd done a bit of podcasting. I got into it in 2017 because we went to this convention for the first time. Mm-hmm. And of course, you do a little bit of research beforehand. You go, what are we actually getting ourselves into? Came across the Shore Leave podcast, an episode featuring yourself, I think, explaining what life is like at the Vegas convention, and listened to that. And we purchased from the group was selling name tags so that people knew who people were. And we thought, that's a nice idea. So we'll go get a name tag, which was being organized by, I think, Jeff Hewlett and Heather Barker were kind of running that in this Facebook group. And they're the people, well, Jeff was the person behind Tricorder Transmissions, the network. And so when we actually picked up the name tags in person from him at the convention, and we got talking, and kind of some connections grew from there.
So you've been on several different podcasts, and you're continuing your media appearances here on Truck Profile. So I feel like we're inheriting a lot of podcasting experience with you being here on the show.
Not that anyone would be able to tell.
And if they had seen the horror show that was the technical problems that you and I had trying to configure this thing, they would think, I don't think either of these clowns has ever been in front of a microphone before their entire life.
It. That's
right. Okay. Well, Jamie, I think it's time to talk about some episodes. Are you game?
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. Well, I've had the M5 do some gentle internet sleuthing, as is his wont, before every episode. And he has generated a list of episodes that we should be talking about. And I think I want to start with one that surprised me, actually. I think, actually, for me, the most surprising one on the list, given all the other picks. So let's start with Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. This, of course, is the one where we have the Klingons and the peace treaty and Khitomer and all of that. So what I want to know from you, Jamie McGregor, is why this movie is particularly meaningful and or special to you.
Well, you did ask me what the first episode I could remember was. I can't remember what really I was watching when I got into it heavily. And I do remember something that I watched when I was 5. But The Undiscovered Country, I distinctly recall watching as part of a school camp in like 1993, so a couple of years before I really got into Trek. It was in a place called Giroa, and I was at the staff member running the camp, who I later found out was a Trekkie, which explains the selection of the movie. Put the movie on, and so the whole camp watched Star Trek VI, and oh my gosh, the visuals, like the purple globules of blood floating in the air, that image just had a huge impression on me. And in particular, I remember loving the deliciousness of the villains, Christopher Plummer and David Warner doing the job that they did in that movie. I was captivated from start to finish. And it wasn't until really I got into Trek a couple of years later that I kind of went, hang on, I've seen this movie before. I know what this is. This is what I saw a couple of years ago. And it has always kind of been my favorite of, I understand Wrath of Khan's the best movie objectively, but Star Trek VI and obviously Voyage Home is up there as well. But in terms of my favorite movie, I've always enjoyed watching Star Trek VI and appreciating the allegory that it is for the Cold War, and the message that it provides us in terms of giving us an insight in what it is like to forgive and not the position that Kirk is put into, generalizing his hatred for an entire culture based on his own personal experiences and then having to be able to overcome that. That is not a message that is going to go out of fashion anytime soon, based on my reading of the world we live in. And I have just always really enjoyed Star Trek VI. Even if someone like Jim Morehouse deridingly refers to it as the search for boots, which I think is underselling its value a little bit.
One of the things I really love when they do in Star Trek is when they put in something this is a slightly overglorified term, but an Easter egg that's a reference to something else that only certain people would know.
Right.
And it's not, an Easter egg almost makes it seem like, I don't know, I always have this feeling that like an Easter egg is supposed to be something that's delightful. Mm-hmm. And this really isn't that. But one of the parts of the movie that made a really big impression on me, and it did so because I knew immediately what it was referring to, is when you have the courtroom scene and you have Chang and he's yelling, "Don't wait for the translation, answer me now."
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And you're
which was taken from reality, right?
That was from reality. Yeah. That's out of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Actually, that was a real moment when our ambassador was actually yelling at the Soviet Union representative at the UN. And because he knew that he spoke English and he was understanding exactly what he was saying. Right. And I just love when they have those little moments like that. And as I've been doing this sort of grand live tweet rewatch of Star Trek, which is on my Twitter account, if people have an interest, they can go look that up. But anytime I come across little moments like that, I always want to highlight them because they just please me so much that the writers do that kind of stuff. And it just thrills me.
Absolutely. Look, Trek is all, it's one of the great franchises because of this, because it spans all genres, all generations of people who have both enjoyed it and created it. It has a huge well of popular culture references, historical references that people will understand and appreciate, that it can kind of infuse into its content, into its DNA. And isn't that one of the best things about Star Trek, that it's accessible and it gives us back information and material that so many people over so many years, 50 years worth of writers, directors, actors, all of a sudden, all of that is now in one piece of popular culture. I mean, it's phenomenal.
One of the things about The Undiscovered Country that I always think about and maybe dwell on, perhaps a bit too much, I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on this, is that I feel that the Saavik character is a character that had so many off-ramps and could have possibly been catapulted into like a major character in the show, much more so than what the character became. And I think you saw that in Star Trek 4, where they got rid of the baby bit that was going to be in there.
Yeah.
Fans might be familiar with that. The idea was that when they were on the planet in Star Trek 3, that Spock had inseminated Saavik, and there's actually a child came of that in Star Trek 4. I think they actually maybe even filmed some of that, but it was definitely something that they were thinking about doing and then didn't do. And then we had this movie where that was supposed to, again, be the Saavik character, and then they decided to go a different direction. And I just felt like there were all these off-ramps they were taking, and I always wanted more of a resolution to that character. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's very important to raise a major caveat with Star Trek 6, which is to say that the treatment of that character in Star Trek 6, I'm kind of glad it isn't Saavik, because the character is effectively mind raped and in a very uncharacteristic or, in retrospect, totally inappropriate and, offensive move by Spock that has not aged well in any way. So for the character's sake, I'm glad that it was a 2-bit rotten traitor that happened to, and not a character that we as a Star Trek watching group actually had some affection for, if you know what I mean.
Right on. Okay. Let's talk about Sacred Ground. Let's talk about Voyager Sacred Ground, where Janeway goes on a really kooky vision quest to save Kes. And there's some wild stuff that happens with these little people in the vision quest and these little spirits that she runs into. It's really wild. I really like this episode, but I want to know from you, why did the M5 put it on the list?
Well, I mean, possibly not one of everyone's favorite episodes of Voyager, but I do like to think about my Trek. That's one of the things that I like most about the show. And personally, I'm a religious person in the sense that I think that there is more to existence and life than what our 5 senses tell us at least, and I'm particularly interested in Christian theology. What really bugs me, though, is doctrinarians who believe that they are so certain about everything in this world, and that really bugs me. And people throughout the must be thousands of different branches of denominations of different religions, all throughout history, for you to firmly believe that your one set of exact beliefs is the actual one true truth really bugs me as an individual. And so as a fan of a series that generally speaking wears its atheism, a little bit on its sleeve, certainly Gene Roddenberry did, I found this a particularly interesting episode for Janeway, being the character that she is. And I have since read material suggesting that, the kind of scientist who finds, religion or who finds themselves questioning science is a bit of a hoary old trope. It kind of wasn't to me when I watched this episode, if that makes sense. And so for me, watching this, it was a bit of eye-opening in the sense of it got me thinking about science in some aspects, and I'm not suggesting that they're equivalent fully, but science in some aspects can be as much of a religion as anything else, depending on how the person perceives it or approaches it. And so, anyway, I found this a very interesting. There's a great line from they've got the three spirits kind of characters. There's George Costanza's mother, and there's a couple of others, sitting there in the waiting room area,
who are fantastic.
Absolutely. And there's a line that has stuck with me for ages, which I had as I think I had a tagline on the Trek BBS back in the mid '90s or whatever, when I'm dialing up, and it was something. It was even when her science fails right before her eyes, she still has full confidence in it. Now there's a leap of faith is the quote, and I've always found that an interesting way of thinking about the science and religion, which it's my personal opinion that they are absolutely compatible in certain ways. Put it this way, I think that they are more compatible than a lot of people think they are. That's what I'd say about that. Does that make sense?
I was listening to a philosopher of science, actually, on a podcast, and he was talking about this very issue. And his point of view is that faith is fundamental to science, and without faith, one cannot be a scientist. In a purely practical sense, for you to run an experiment, you have to have faith that there is an empirical truth to be discovered, or even to be falsified. Otherwise, the whole thing would be futile to begin with. Why would you even do this experiment? It makes no sense. Why would you even do it? So I thought it was an interesting point of view. And certainly you don't have to have supernatural beliefs, but you have to have faith of a kind to approach the world scientifically, to believe that there's a rational truth out there, an objective third way that exists separate from our perceived realities. That's a big leap for people, and I think it was great. One of the parts of the episode that I think really delighted me on my rewatch for this was that you have Chakotay, who is the openly spiritual character, and he has to stay on the ship. And Janeway, the scientific character, has to go on the vision quest, and Chakotay's like, "But what about me?" Right? And he has to stay behind to monitor the signals.
Yes, he has to do all of the tech.
Yeah, he's got to do all the tech, and
while she's tripping down on the planet.
Yeah, and Janeway's going off having a vision quest, and I just thought that was delightful, and I actually very much enjoyed that sort of little flip in the characters.
I think my favorite part was the initial process where they just give her what she wants. They just give her the experience that she was expecting. When I was watching it, when that gets revealed, I was kind of like, okay, I get where this is going. In so many ways in our lives, our expectations and what we bring to something are then exactly what we take back out of it without actually thinking about it or experiencing things in the way that we should. So anyway, I found this an interesting episode.
One of the things we were talking about earlier was I love it when there's these little references to other things and there's sometimes I'm not even sure if they're Easter eggs or not. And I admit I didn't look this one up, but the bit where Janeway sticks her hand into the basket.
Oh, yeah.
It very much reminded me of the Cleopatra film.
Oh, okay.
Where she puts her hand in to get bitten by the asp at the end. Just the whole way that it was shot there, just elements of that were very evocative to me of that. And I wonder if it was intentional or not, but it was something that jumped out at me, so I thought I would mention it.
All I'd say is, as a native of Australia, I found that a somewhat triggering scene in the sense that you never know exactly when you're reaching inside something, an old pair of shoes or whatever, what you're going to find inside. So, yes, I must, as a bit of an arachnophobe, and yes, there is such a thing as that in Australia. That wasn't my favourite part of the episode. I'll give you that much.
So a couple of other things. I have a big observation and a small observation from this episode. So I guess we'll start maybe with the small one and see what you think about it.
Let's work our way up. Yes, small observation first.
Which is Becky Ann Baker as the guide was so good in this episode. I just wanted to call out her performance as particularly great.
Amazing.
And she's got sort of this like tut-tut sort of attitude with Janeway about everything, which I think is great because I love seeing characters get sort of knocked down a peg a little bit. You know, this is for all the characters. I always love it when they get sort of exposed to something in a new way by someone who's not putting up with any of their nonsense.
It was an interesting choice too, because she's not a kind of stuffy monk, so to speak. You know, putting you through this kind of religious process. It's the exact opposite. She's kind of like a cool character you can talk to normally, kind of thing. And anyway, it was an interesting, good choice.
My own favorite little bit in her performance is when the little acolytes come up and they start to touch the Janeway bun, and there's like a little momentary freak out. I just thought that was, do not touch the bun.
Yes, that's a good one too.
But I have this much more profound part of the episode that really is important to me, which is the importance of experience and these experiential moments in life. And one of the ways I might describe it is I'll use an example from like a roller coaster, and I'll think of a famous roller coaster. Let's say Space Mountain from Disneyland, right? You can go and get the architectural plans of Space Mountain, and you can study them, and you can look at them, and you can go look at YouTube videos of people talking about Space Mountain. And you can read reviews on, rollercoasterfanatic.com, which I'm sure exists and is a thing, of what people think about Space Mountain. But your knowledge of it is a meager kind. The only way to really experience it is to ride it. And I think that that's a lesson that Janeway learned in this episode, which is that, knowing the science. And I think she talks in her conversation with Chakotay, where they're talking about, his vision quest. And he's talking about like he understands the science behind how it all works. But it's not the same as the experience of it.
Yes.
And I think that in our modern life, we've become so detached from the experiences around us, typically because we're attached to a screen or to something else. We've got something in our ear, something in our eye. And I think that that's making our own experience of the world somehow meager and less than it could be. And it's just something that occurred to me as I was watching the episode. And it was just a very profound moment for me as I was watching it this time. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. And the ability to be surprised by something, or the ability to be moved by something, or the ability to be, experience something in a new way is something that's an experience that we don't want to lose. And it's certainly the experience that Janeway goes through. She gets all of those emotions in the different experiences she has on the planet. And yes, it's a little bit hackneyed and cliched, but she finishes the episode listening to the doctor prattling on about what the science was, and she's not 100% convinced, And I think, it's an interesting way to leave the episode.
Right on. The M5 has put an episode on the list, and there's a little cautionary note here. It says, Jamie has a take on this episode. Deep Space Nine, Far Beyond the Stars. So I'm not sure if this is an episode that is profoundly meaningful to you, or if you have a unique perspective that we need to discuss. I have no idea what I'm in for. So go ahead and hit me, Jamie. Tell me what's going on here.
I hear a lot of discussion about this episode, obviously, because it's one of the greatest episodes of Trek. I don't know. I just had... This is not a whole spiel about the episode or anything like that. My take is that the prophets and it's interesting we follow on a semi-religious discussion into another semi-religious discussion, but it's my take that the prophets provide the vision to Sisko of Benny as a message to him of perseverance, because the moment in the series, Sisko is facing a very difficult situation with the war, and he is tired out. Everyone is just genuinely smashed, basically, by the situation that they find themselves in the Dominion War. And the vision that he provides, in other words, I hear a lot about this, it was an episode about racism, it was an episode about police brutality, it was an episode about, whatever you, honestly, that episode is about so many different things. But for me, fundamentally, the racism that it presents is to try and to have Sisko put himself in the shoes of someone who was facing something as hard as he was experiencing in his real life at that particular time, and finding a way out, or understanding that potentially to stop being so self-piteous about the situation you find yourself in. There have been plenty of people who are worse off in history about the situations that they find themselves in or whatever. And I'm just saying I don't hear that aspect of it really discussed very much, which is to say, what was the point of the episode? It wasn't just I seem to take a different point out of the episode than what a lot of people do, is what I'm trying to say here. Most people just want to sit with things were very difficult to Benny Russell, whereas for me, the point is, how do you continue and having perspective can help you as an individual when you're up against it. Having perspective about what other people have faced and managed to endure. Anyway, that was kind of my take on that. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think that there is something to that if you take the perspective that the prophets are trying to gird Sisko for what is yet to come by putting him through this historical lesson, it really changes the episode in a lot of ways if you approach it that way. So I would encourage listeners out there, go out and give the episode another look and approach it with that perspective and see what you take from it.
One thing about Far Beyond the Stars I think is worth mentioning on a show such as this is the fact that I came across in an old magazine a full-page reproduction of the image that Roy Rittenhouse draws of Deep Space Nine, in the old kind of in the cartoon manner that he drew that in the show. And I did a reproduction of that, blew it up, took it to one of the conventions and had J.G. Hertzler sign it as Roy Rittenhouse, and I've had that framed.
Nice.
And that's a great little thing to have on the wall. And it's a kind of like, these are the things that interest me, unique things, interesting things. I don't have a collection of, mass-produced anything or models
Playmates toys
or Playmates toys. No, I don't have any of that, but I'm interested in things that I can kind of create that have some interest and affection for me.
Well, send a picture to me of that, and I will post it. That my listeners, that is what they want.
Will do. I'll send a photo of that. It's a great little thing.
Now, for my money, I just want to say there's often a little discussion about, what's the best episode of Deep Space Nine or, whatever. I think that Far Beyond the Stars is way better than any of the other episodes of Deep Space Nine. It's my absolute favorite Deep Space Nine episode. It just has quality Trek.
Right.
And as I look at what I call a quality Trek, I'm always struck by how many of those episodes don't have like a lot of prototypical Star Trek stuff in it. Mm-hmm. Episodes like Carbon Creek from Enterprise, right, which is not about spaceships at all, and episodes like that, City on the Edge of Forever again, just episodes like that just are not about what people think Star Trek's about, and they're the best of all Star Trek, in my opinion. A lot of episodes like that, and I think that's one of the great things about the show.
Absolutely,
in general, is when they pull stuff off like that. So, speaking of episodes that try to pull things off, let's talk about some modern Trek. Let's talk about Star Trek Discovery, the season 1 episode, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. Dance with me for podcasting, Jamie, and tell me what's going on with this particular episode. Why is it meaningful to you?
You did mention that I'd done a bit of podcasting and appeared on a few other shows. Mm-hmm. And partly that is thanks to Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. So when I did go to Vegas in 2017 and met Jeff and kind of I followed Disco Trek, which was a kind of, at the time, a community-created podcast to follow the episodes of Discovery as they aired. And you could put your name down and be on an episode. And so I put my name down and I got put on an episode, and I talked about Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. I was paired with Barry DeFord by chance, who I subsequently got on really well with and have met in person a few times and recorded with, and his friend Shashank Kavaru, who was doing Politrex with him at the same time. As you can imagine from what I've already spoken about with you, something like Politrex as a series was very interesting to me, that podcast.
One thing I want to say, Barry was the number one episode of Trek Profiles.
Your
was my interview with him.
number one guest. Yeah,
yep,
your number
my
one
very
guest.
first guest.
Great guy. And, it led to me getting a little bit more involved and doing a few weekly treks with you and others. And then, you get to meet a few people and you get to go on Trek Ranks, and, I've met Jim and Alex Perry and Brooke Horton and the people that I've been on, Trek Ranks with and things like that. So that, as an episode, it was a gateway to me for being more involved with the community than I was by simply just turning up and going to a convention. Now, it also happens to be the case, and this is why the M5 is smart enough to put this on the list, that it's probably my favorite episode of Discovery.
Okay.
A show that I have some problems with, just in terms of its evenness and direction, and I have some issues with it, but I still enjoy it and I still watch it, and I still think it's a great show. Partly because I think this is one of the most standalone episodes of the show, and
without a doubt,
I kind of feel that they did an amazing job. Like, the episode is so much fun to watch. And Rainn Wilson chewing the scenery, Lorca, Jason Isaacs doing the same thing. I love the fact that he couldn't give a damn about the conservation of the creature. He just wants, whatever he has to do done and move on with it. These things. But it was a very important episode for Michael Burnham. It was a very important episode for Stamets, for making that character more relatable. They did a great job with that episode. And my concern a little bit is I think Trek is at its best when it is looking inward. And my concern a little bit is that serialized shows in general don't allow for as much of that as I like in my Trek, if that makes sense. And the serialized nature of something like DS9, which I'm, absolutely massive DS9 fan, people kind of talk that up, but you could, with the sole exception of maybe a little bit at the beginning of season 6 and the end of season 7, the show was not serialized. It was
correct.
It had
correct opinion.
It had serialized aspects to it, and the characters grew, which is why I think it's one of the best shows. But it was not serialized. It was an issue of the week or something of the week. So, whereas I find that the modern Trek series get too obsessed with plot, and they lose track of what they're actually trying to achieve because the plot comes first. And I think they would all like to tell themselves that the character comes first and that the plot serves the character. My constructive criticism, because don't get me wrong, I love it all and I don't want the Twitterati to come out and tell me that I don't like Trek, but I think occasionally they get... Actually, the Twitterati can do whatever they want now because Elon Musk killed Tweetbot, which means I'm not really on Twitter as much anymore. But anyway, I think the writers struggle a little bit with that. I think sometimes the characters are serving the plot rather than the other way around.
I've mentioned this on the show before. I think that there's just been a lot of chaos in the Star Trek Discovery production behind the scenes, like in the management and in the showrunners. And it's just caused a lot of problems for the consistency of the show. And I think that story is yet to be written, but it's a strong parallel to like the early TNG era when, we learned later, like all the chaos that was happening.
Oh yeah. Chaos on the bridge. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for seeing that reference. I appreciate you.
Yes.
So I think that there's a story that we've heard some tantalizing hints about, right? I mean, Brian Fuller was fired before the show even went on the air. And then of course we get new showrunners and then they're out, and then we get some new showrunners and they're out. And then we heard later that there were writers who were fired before we even knew they were writers.
Yep.
And then in the latest season, as we record this, their stated reason for doing the time jump was that it was too hard to do a prequel. So like they wanted to invalidate the premise of their very own show, and
yes.
Be like Voyager gets home to the Alpha Quadrant in season 3.
and to be fair, I think there's actually also some of that a little bit in Picard seasons 1 and 2 as well. I read an interview with, people can correct me, but I think it was with Akiva Goldsman, who was asked at one point, what lessons did you learn from Picard season 1? And he said, you really got to know where you're ending, as you're writing the first half of the season, if you're going to do a serialized show. I was like, really? That's the lesson? Like, you didn't know where you were going for the first half of the show. And I was like, that comes out on screen. Like, I can tell that you guys had no idea how you really wanted to end the show as you were writing it. And then, you know, for Picard Season 2, it kind of starts with Terry Matalas running the show, and then he disappears to go and do Season 3, and Akiva Goldsman finishes Season 2. And I think I noticed something, maybe this is myself kidding myself, but, you know, I think I noticed a difference in the first half of the season to the second half of the season in terms of Star Trek Picard. I mean, I'm sure, you know, there was a certain continuity of all the writers and all that kind of stuff, but I kind of felt that the second half of the show didn't really pay out on the direction and the promise of the first half of the season, if that makes sense. So anyway, that's my thought on the Picard side of the serialized Treks.
I just want to say we're being kind of hard on some of the new shows, but we both love the new shows.
Yeah,
I'm
can't
very
wait
excited.
for Season 3.
Yep, can't wait to see what Season 3 is. I'm a big fan of Terry Matalas. I watched 12 Monkeys in real time, and I can say that I did not have this podcast back then, and I had a very little personal Twitter account, and I would tweet at him, and he would answer my tweets as a nobody, and it was really fun. That I could tweet at him and he would say, that was good, or didn't like this, or whatever.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I interacted with him on Twitter way back. And I remember one of my favorite little bits in the show. Are you familiar with the 12 Monkeys show at all? I have not seen it, no. Very brief thumbnail sketch is that there's an apocalypse kind of in the future, and people are time traveling back to roughly present day. They sort of get away from that at certain points, and they're traveling sort of way into different times, but they're traveling into our present to try to stop this apocalypse. And the 12 Monkeys people are trying to cause the apocalypse, and these people are trying to stop it. So there's this wonderful scene, and I just love these like little quips he would put in. There's the female character is a modern day person, and then the guy she's with is from the future after the apocalypse. And so they're trying to find a location where something's about to happen, and they roll up on this thing, and she's looking at this building. She's like, this doesn't look right to me. And, you know, you see the world that he comes from, and he's like, I'm from the apocalyptic future, honey. None of this looks good to me. None of this looks right to me. I just like that captures like the whole aesthetic of the show is like right there in that little scene. And it was just glorious. So I have faith that he knows how to tell an entertaining story, and it looks like it's going to be a heck of a season. So we'll see what we see. Maybe when people hear this, it'll already be out, and this won't be terribly interesting. So I think we should move on. I want to talk to you about an episode that I have to admit was very surprised made the list. I don't think this episode would be on anyone's top 10 list, which is not unusual for Trek Profiles, but it just seemed to me to be an episode that was sort of straightforward. So I'm curious what you took from it, and it's Deep Space Nine Rivals. So here we have that wily businessman Quark, who we already talked about, who's one of your favorites. And of course, he starts to lose his business to Chris Sarandon, who's an El-Orian who opens up a competing place across the street, and he has special magic anti-neutrino gambling machines that everybody just cannot quit playing. So what's going on here with this episode, and why is it so special to you?
I am really a massive DS9 fan. I love the show. I love everything about it. Well, not everything. Profit and Lace. And I think seasons 2 and 3 get kind of forgotten and left out by people. And I think I've already established my bona fides in the sense that I like Trek that makes me think or looks inward as much as I appreciate. And I love the big arcs and the geopolitical stuff and the wars and and the special episodes. And I love all of that. But I also like day in a life. Let's just see what's going on. Quark gets outsmarted by another con man. I think this is the bread and butter of what makes a show great. And even DS9's not so great episodes, I really enjoy. And in terms of, I think people are smart enough to tell the difference between their favorite episodes and the episodes that they think are the best. And for me, Rivals is so much fun. Quark gets his comeuppance a little bit. And in particular, the bit of the show that I find really enjoyable is the Bashir-O'Brien relationship, because really...
The racquetball.
Through the racquetball. They originally hate each other, right? Or they can't stand each other. Then at this point in the show, they've come to a kind of begrudging respect in some way, shape, or form. There's kind of, I think it's Armageddon Game, an episode where they start to thaw a little bit. But this is the first time, at the beginning of the episode, they want to beat each other and they can't stand each other, really. And by the end, they're kind of cooperating, working together to give Quark the boot and fix things for the Bajoran War Orphans Fund. And I think that it's just a great little picture of where the writers did serialize aspects of the show without making the show serialized, as we were discussing before. So it's a beautiful little relationship moment for Bashir and O'Brien. It's a fantastic little comeuppance for Quark, although, yes, okay, everything works out for him in the end. I think my favorite scene in the whole thing is Sisko absolutely getting into Quark about the fact that he didn't beg him to stay. He blackmailed him to stay in episode 1, in Emissary. He blackmailed him to stay in Emissary. And anyway, I just find those, even when it's standard Trek, I think DS9 is great. So there you go. That's why I love Rivals.
So one of the things I love about going back and watching some of these episodes with a careful eye, especially when I'm watching them to prepare for being on Trek Profiles, when a guest is going to talk about it, is that I see things that I just want to place a bookmark in and just like put in my back pocket to taunt people with later. And one of those is this whole idea of all these businesses folding on the promenade. And it's like, how can a business fold when there's no money? It's very interesting. Also, the Bajoran war orphans need blankets. We have replicators, bro.
Yes.
Go ahead,
John. That was the conceit is that they would have sent a replicator down to replicate the blankets. They wouldn't have actually sent the blankets. That's you've picked that apart. But and come on, John. Do I have to anti-nitpick you here? The Federation doesn't have money, but I'm sure the Promenade has money, right?
And I would love to know how O'Brien and Bashir are paying for those drinks. That's all I want to know.
They're putting it on Sisko's tab.
So one little thing I saw that just pleased me to no end, and I'm not even sure why, but when Quark is doing the teleplay of the game, in the front row, who do you have? Bajoran monks. All the Bajoran monks are betting on the game for the Bajoran Orphans Fund for blankets, and they're all in the front row, eagerly watching the game, and are very excited about who's winning. And there's just something about that tickled me that I really enjoyed. So I just wanted to call that out, that they put the monks in the front row for watching the game.
I'm sure that happens in real life, John. I'm sure there's some well-meaning charity out there that puts all their charities' money on the Eagles to win the Super Bowl, and knows how they can multiply their money. I'm sure that's what happens in real life.
So let's compare this episode against a TNG episode, which has a very similar thematic element, and it's the idea of these rigged games.
Yes.
It's, of course, The Game from TNG, where they've learned how to turn microphones that call center agents use into little headsets that melt your brains and make you betray the Federation. So, of course, we have Wesley coming back from Starfleet Academy, where apparently he's off learning Latin and taking creative writing, I guess, along with some scientific subjects. And he also goes on a date with the wonderful and delightful Ashley Judd, who has all of her rules on the ship. So I want to know from you, what's going on with the game? Why is this episode on the list? Jamie McGregor, I ask you.
So, I'm in 1995 or 96 when I was starting to get into Trek. I indicated that I would have to find out what episodes did I want to go and rent. I kind of used Wesley as a bit of a hook to get into the series, in the sense that, there was a character roughly about my age, and I never hated Wesley like everyone else did. I didn't adore the character necessarily, but I kind of, wanted to see what happened to the character, and used Wesley episodes as a kind of a way to get into the series. So I've always followed Will Wheaton on social media, and even when he had his website and all that kind of stuff. I love Will Wheaton. He's great kind of personality to kind of follow, and
well beloved among the fans in general, I'd say.
Absolutely.
And deservedly so.
And, it's actually quite difficult in 1996 to work out what are the Wesley episodes of TNG. You've got, I'd have to be at school. You'd have to go to the school library to get access to this new thing called the internet. Star Trek had at that particular moment in time sold its soul to Microsoft for something called Star Trek The Continuum, which you had to be a Microsoft user, which of course the library at my school was not. So, how do you actually, log in to find some of this stuff out? I mean, it was a kind of crazy time, the beginnings of the internet. But I remember having so much fun downloading material and discovering other people who enjoyed Star Trek, given that I was, the only one that I knew. So as far as this episode in particular, this is just an episode I really loved. And let's put aside how awesome Ashley Judd is to one side. Let's take that as read. She is absolutely delightful. But I just found this to be a fun romp, right? You've got... Actually, that was a Freudian comment, given that the episode begins with Riker having a fun romp in some alien world.
On what looks like a set taken right off the set of The Golden Girls, which I think was in production at the same time. Literally, Florida retirement home, like, that's it. That's the set.
That's hilarious. I think we kind of overlooked the potential court-martial that there probably could be, that Riker, who was down on a planet getting a leg over and brings back effectively a device that causes the entire ship to be taken over by an evil alien. But anyway, I think everyone just looked past that.
Excellent point. I just want to dwell on that for 1 second, which is this is my own particular thing that I mention every time stuff like this comes up, which is that Risa canonically in the show sucks. And as much as people want to say, oh, Rice is amazing, Rice is wonderful, if I could go to Rice, how wonderful it would be. I want to remind you that if you look at every Risa episode, only bad stuff happens on there. I think the only person who had a good trip to Risa was Hoshi, and it was sort of by accident, and everybody else has a terrible time. I mean, Worf turns into a psychopath on a visit to Risa in Deep Space Nine, I might add.
Yeah. So the two Enterprise boys get beaten up and left in the bottom of the dungeon, right?
Yeah. Look what happens to Picard when he goes there. Look what happens to Archer when he goes there. It is all bad. There are far better planets to take your vacations on in the Star Trek universe than Risa. I just want to point that out. I'm sorry for the interruption.
If you really want a good experience, you'll go to 10 Forward and eat chocolate. Like that. Tell me that isn't one of the greatest scenes in Star Trek history. The scene of Troy eating chocolate, and Jonathan Frakes' reaction to that is half the fun.
Oh, it was glorious.
In this episode, I remember watching it, and the scene where Wesley goes to Picard and, oh, thank you, Mr. Crusher. We'll definitely look into this. This is fantastic. And then he turns around and puts the device on. I remember going, oh no, what's he going to do now? So I enjoyed this episode. It's good Wesley episode. He's at the academy, but he's not in strife as he is in the first duty, or incredibly disaffected as he is at the end. He's not annoying like he may have been perceived to be in the first few seasons of the show. Anyway, just a fun episode that I liked a lot.
I have to admit, I burst out laughing, and maybe it's because I'm essentially 12 years old, when Dr. Crusher and Worf walk in and they essentially see Leffler and Wesley sitting on the bed having space orgasms together playing this video game.
Correct.
And it was just too preposterous, and I literally burst out laughing.
It's a hilarious scene, right? I mean, it's not intended to be, but in retrospect, obviously it is. But John, this is the genius of this episode. I mean, those things look eerily close to whatever Google Glass looked like. It was prescient, the design of these things. And this is a scary movie about mobile phones before mobile phones existed. Tell me you couldn't walk into 10 Forward now, and what will everyone be doing? Everyone will be scrolling up and down on a device, getting the endorphins of little hits of social media or whatever. And don't tell me those devices don't control our mind the same way this Qatarian woman did. I think I'm obviously exaggerating for effect slightly here, but Google and Facebook and all the social medias, there's a little bit of mind control going in there in terms of what they show to people and how people react to it. I think this is it's an interestingly prescient episode from 1990.
I think in my research for this, I read somewhere that it was actually based on Tetris. Is what they were thinking of.
Okay. Right.
That was actually the inspiration for the whole thing. And I made an allusion in my introduction to this to the design of the game headset. Mm-hmm. And I had to laugh because it was very obvious to me that it was a call center headset that used to hook up to like Avaya phone systems. Those clear plastic rods were the microphone boom for those headsets. And I used to work a lot with call centers, and I remembered those headsets. So when I see those things, it's like immediately I knew what it was when I was looking at those. It was just fantastic.
Yeah.
So next I want to ask you about a novel because it thematically fits in with our discussion. You picked a Deep Space Nine novel called The Big Game. Now, one of the things that you did. And one of the things that I had to say about this is that any novel that brings together Berlinghoff Rasmussen, you've got Primmin, Lursa, you've got Mayhardu, Keiko, Garrick, and all of them on Deep Space Nine playing a card game. It's wild. Tell me what's going on here.
What more could you ask for? As a peek behind the curtain, you do send out to everyone before the show to sort of say, do you, what do you, are you interested in books or comics or what episodes or, bits and pieces of the extended fandom, shall we say? And I'm very uninteresting on that front. I haven't really gotten into the comics, although I've read a few. I haven't really got into the novels, but I've read a few. I have a few books, but I don't really have too many of the novels, and I don't really have that much of the production side either. The stuff that I tend to have in my, book collection would be kind of analysis of the show, things like the physics of Star Trek, the religion of Star Trek, the philosophy of those kinds of things are the ones that I get interested in. My exception is I read The Big Game, which is a trashy novel. I think it's like the third or fourth of the novels while DS9 was on the run, and the pitch that obviously got whoever it was the gig was Quark hosts a poker tournament and hilarity ensues, and it's awesome. I mean, to be honest with you, John, I haven't read it in years, but if you can, I didn't really understand poker at the time either, to be honest, and it gave me a lesson in poker as well as bringing together all these luminaries. And the other thing I like about it is that there is a representative from each of the main kind of Alpha and Beta Quadrant, races all together, all competing in this tournament, and it's exactly to your point about thematic. It's exactly what I love to think about DS9 being, which is this kind of it's a melting pot of different people all coming together at the edge of the unknown. It's kind of that's what DS9, the space station, should be. Mm-hmm. And so it definitely feeds into what I like about DS9 from that perspective, even if it is a fairly forgettable novel.
So if you're not a Deep Space Nine fan, would you still recommend it?
If you're a poker fan, I would recommend it.
Is there actually discussion of the games and of the hands and the strategies?
Yeah, absolutely, yes, because it has to take the reader through what is happening, and so the tension builds. I don't know. It's like James Bond playing blackjack or something like that, or what does he play? He plays baccarat. Well, I don't know what James Bond plays, but anyway,
baccarat's a very high-end game. It's for fancy lads, so I guess he would play fancy lads.
So yeah, I think he plays baccarat. So you're the Las Vegas native. You tell me what games they're all playing.
I am not a native. I was born and raised in New York.
Sorry.
So
you're a
about
current Las Vegas denizen, is what I meant to say. Yes.
I am an inhabitant. I infest the city with myself. Well, I want to return to Voyager then, and I want to talk about a different episode, one that I think falls in with your theory on that you like Trek that makes you think, because this one certainly has a lot of content in it that makes you ponder, and it's Star Trek Voyager Death Wish. This, of course, is the one with the fantastic Garrett Graham as Quinn, the second Q, Peter Dennis as Sir Isaac Newton, and Maury Ginsburg as Maury Ginsburg, where we have Quinn, who is a Q who's tired of living and wants to commit suicide, and Janeway decides that she's going to hold a hearing on whether or not this should happen. Turns out that we've had a whole series of episodes like this in Star Trek, going all the way back to the original series. So I wonder what your particular take and why on this episode is and why it's special to you.
This was one of 2 episodes that was on the first ever VHS tape that I bought. So instead of having to go to Video Easy and get these episodes as they get released. I don't know why or what position I was in, but I actually bought a VHS, and so I then owned these 2 episodes, and I must have watched them 100 times each. So that's Death Wish, and on the other side, I just said on the other side as if it was a cassette tape. Sorry. Also on the VHS was Dreadnought. So these were the 2 episodes that I had a huge affinity for, and they're great episodes. Death Wish, beyond the obvious euthanasia allegory, is, it's a very philosophical episode. There's a lot of talking in it. There's a lot of thinking in it. It is a courtroom episode, which, as you say, has been seen a lot in Trek. We don't generally see asylum hearings, though. Can you think of another asylum hearing in Trek? I'm trying to think. Usually it's kind of get our hero off who's been unjustly accused, but this is an asylum hearing, which is slightly different. And I did some, as a lot of people do, if you're in the humanities, I studied some philosophy at university when I would have been watching this episode. And what the key thing that struck me from this episode was, it was the notion that, in actual fact, omnipotence and omnipresence would result in boredom and intolerable suffering, which is what Janeway calls it. If you could exist in all places and know everything about everything all the time and exist in all places at the same time, what kind of boredom, what kind of unending sameness would you experience? And, I think my favorite line in the show is when the Q that we know and love kind of goes, we've all done the scarecrow, and I just love that moment, because I remember thinking about it. Yeah, everyone would have had to have been the scarecrow, because everyone would have had to have done everything all the time in order to be like that. And I mean, obviously, we don't know of any beings that are omnipotent and omnipresent or whatever, but so it's a bit of a nonsense kind of concept to be thinking about. But I found it fascinating to actually think about the nature of existence, and in this particular case, the nature of non-existence, this being obviously a euthanasia allegory. Usually it's the state wanting to execute someone. Very rarely do you see the state, desperately trying to keep people alive, except in cases of people wanting to end their own lives. So, I found it a very good episode. And the other episode being Dreadnought, I love as well. It's got a cool sci-fi concept, which is
very cool.
It's a great way to have kind of B'Elanna battle B'Elanna without actually having, a doppelganger episode. So anyway, those 2 episodes I kind of bracket together.
One of the things about Death Wish that I thought was really interesting, and something that I'm still thinking about and trying really to come to terms with, is that it's really holding up the essential premise of broader Star Trek and saying, you don't actually want this. And what I mean by that is, if you go back to TOS, right, to the original, captain's log that opens the show, right, to boldly go, to seek out, right, explore strange new worlds, all that. And you look at TNG, same thing, like Captain Picard, right? We are literally out here to experience the wonders of the universe and to find out all the things. That's what we're doing. And that's a very core, fundamental part of Trek. And when you look at a movie like TMP, V'ger, been there, done that.
Yep.
And it kind of sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have Q, or Quinn in this case, been there, done that. Oh my God, this sucks. Do not want. And so when you compare sort of Janeway, Picard, Kirk, sort of this whole idea of the Federation, the exploratory nature of Starfleet, right? We're out here to find out all the things. If you ever succeed in that mission, you're not going to like it. And I just think it's a very interesting contrast that really jumped out at me as I was rewatching this. And so,
do you think that, for example, Picard would have found the same way as Janeway did?
I think that Star Trek is very good at giving captains their episodes that speak to their unique strengths. And I think that Star Trek itself has even said this in the four corners of the screen, in that Strange New Worlds episode where we see Pike doing Balance of Terror and he screws it all up because you were the wrong captain. You're the right. That was a Kirk episode, my bro. You were. Yes. That was a Kirk episode. Why are you in the Kirk episode? Get out. Right.
Yes.
You belong in the Pike episodes. And so that was a really cheeky way, I think, of bringing this sort of idea that I have in my head to the screen, and actually seeing it in the four corners of the screen in the show. And I really like that. But, that's my own harebrained theory.
Picard is not going to do what Cisco did in for the uniform, destroy the ecosystem of a planet in order to achieve his aims in that system. They're very different captains from that perspective. So your point is that, and no one would write that episode, is what you're saying. No one would write that episode that doesn't make sense for that character at that particular moment. Okay. So your argument is this is an opportunity for Janeway to use her reasoning skills, which are her forte.
That's why I never get into
compassion, right?
I think that she's definitely the most emotionally intelligent of all the captains.
Yes,
I think that we see in Star Trek. She really has a lot of discussions in numerous episodes about how the crew is feeling, and some of that is due to the nature of the show and the premise of what the Voyager's doing. But I think she's really interested in that, and rightfully so, as any captain of a ship should be. But I think that when it comes to these rankings that people do of like captains, people are like, this is the best captain or that's the best captain. I'm like, that is a nonsensical discussion. I mean, it's like saying, this is the best cold drink on a hot day. Well, says you, there's no, there's just no way to objectively put these things together in a way.
The answer, though, John, is Cisco
sense.
is the best captain. Just want to make that clear. Yeah. Sorry.
Cisco is not a captain. He's a commander.
Right. He wasn't the best. He wasn't the best captain while he was a commander. Put it that way. No, I totally agree. But it's fandom, John. That's fun. It's fun to rank things.
All right, let's move on along, and I do not mean let's move along home, a la Moraine. Let's move on to some more Deep Space Nine. Let's talk about your favorite character, and let's talk about his introductory episode. Let's talk about His Way. And this, of course, is the episode where we get introduced to the fabulous character of Vic Fontaine, one of my favorites from Deep Space Nine, along with Quark and Ezri Dax. All the humans in Deep Space Nine totally suck. It's all about the aliens in that show, and they are amazing.
The holograms.
I just want to say I'm totally in love with Vic's tuxedo shirt, which has like 857 buttons down the front. It's amazing. So tell me about this particular episode and why you are so in love with it, Jamie McGregor.
In a real sense, this episode, because it was the introduction of Vic Fontaine, changed a lot of my life, really, and gave me interests that I didn't have before, activities that I didn't have before, hobbies that I didn't have before. It's really had a massive impact on me. So I watched the episode like everyone else. I think I remember reading about it on the internet first and thinking, what on earth is this going to be?
Is this roughly when it originally came out or shortly thereafter?
It would be shortly thereafter, because this is one of the episodes that would have come out on VHS, on a monthly schedule. I think we were about 3 or 4 months behind the US before the distributor would release them for purchase and rental. And and I enjoyed the music, and I wasn't a jazz fan or a vocals fan or a easy listening, as some people might call it, kind of fan at the time. But I got into it. I was like, oh, this is good stuff. And then James Darren released This One's from the Heart, and I did have another friend of mine who was into Sinatra kind of at the time as well, bit of and into 60s movies and all that kind of stuff. And I just remember driving around in my car with This One's from the Heart playing on repeat. Like, it was on repeat. I just love the album. I think the best day in my poor car's life, the CD player in my car's life, was when Darren released Because of You, the second album, so that finally we got a change of content. This episode absolutely changed my interest, because from there I got an interest in Sammy Davis Jr. How that happened is a bit of a story. If we want to go into it, I actually started to compile all of the songs on This One's from the Heart, sung by James Darren, by Sinatra, and to try and hear other versions. Possibly I had tired my own self out of playing the CD, and I was like, oh, I want to hear the same songs done by other people. And I happened to buy a Rat Pack album from the Villa Venice in Chicago. I still remember where I was. I was in Melbourne for the Formula One Grand Prix, and I put on my headphones, and because it was a live album, this was a Rat Pack album. So we got a bit of Dean Martin, and then Sammy came on stage, and he sings What Kind of Fool Am I? And an old Arlen Mercer song called Out of This World. And I just went, holy smokes, this guy is incredible. And that kind of started a Sammy thing for me. And it really morphed into a love for jazz vocals generally, jazz generally. in a roundabout way, it's how I became a New York Jets fan, so that's a bad thing.
But hold on, we're going to have to get there. So I just want to understand the chronology here, and then I'll turn it over to you. So,
sure.
So your introduction to this was James Darren in Deep Space Nine.
Absolutely.
How would you describe your musical tastes before that? If you even had any preferences or...
I mean, I was pretty young. I didn't really... I would listen to a lot of different stuff. So some popular stuff, some honestly, a lot of different stuff. Some classical, some rock, some jazz maybe. To be honest, a lot of stuff that my dad had lying around, or cassettes or things that or things that were popular at the time. I didn't really have an interest musically, would be how I'd put it.
Okay, so James Darren was really your way in to this whole era.
Yes, absolutely.
And what was it particularly about Sammy that drew you as opposed to Frank or Dean or any of the other guys?
There's a certain kind of energy. There's something about Sammy that was, he never gave any less than 110% at any particular moment when he was performing. And I think that comes through even on record. It certainly comes through in extant video footage and things like that. Plus, ultimately, as I found out more about him, he had a variety of talents that stepped him apart from others in the entertainment industry that I came to appreciate, would be what I would say. But, I liked his singing voice, would be my initial reaction.
You shared some photographs with me that are not necessarily generally available. I don't want to say too much about that yet, but you showed me this one photo that I absolutely loved of Sammy playing the drums. And I think it captures his whole energy in this one photo.
Yeah, he was well known for doing much longer time on stage than any of the other. I mean, this was part of his psychology, right? He was a performer first, second, last, every day of his life. He was Mr. Show Business, Mr. Entertainment, Mr. Whatever. And there's a few pathological issues that come along with that he certainly suffered from. But as far as being a piece of entertainment, a piece of and he was best live. Obviously I will never know, but everyone who's ever seen him has said that he was best live. But I have enough enjoyment listening to the 50 albums he recorded and all that kind of stuff as well.
All right, so I want to talk more with you about Sammy. Maybe we'll put that in the bonus material.
Sure.
But I want to come back to the episode, right? So we're dealing with Vic,
yep.
The hologram. Again, this is one of these episodes that is entirely not about the prototypical Star Trek things, right? It's really sort of a Cyrano de Bergerac episode in a lot of ways. We really have, in this particular episode, we've got Vic, who is really teaching Odo how to get game.
Yeah, totally.
And that's really what it's about. So what is it about that particular part of it that makes this episode memorable for you? Because I'll tell you, as I watched it, I was reminded of some recent discourse that I saw online where people were like, you know what, Star Trek needs to do a musical episode. And I was like, that exists.
Yes.
It's already been done.
So there was a lot of criticism of Ira Bear at the time, I think, and even subsequently of people just saying, boring. You bring in, this is self-indulgent on Ira's part. He's brought in someone to do the music that he likes, and we're just wasting time while someone's singing songs. I've seen interviews with Ira where he's kind of said, no, we pick the songs very intentionally. Like, this is why musicals exist. Songs can actually tell a story themselves. They can tell us about characters. There is a reason that the first song is Come Fly With Me, right? Because that is exactly what Vic is saying to Odo at that particular time. And it's what Odo needs to break out of his own skin, right? And to jump to the point of what you're saying, I can't wait for a musical episode in Star Trek, and I sure hope we get one on either Discovery or on Strange New Worlds, both of whom would have fantastic casts to do that. But you're right, it's been done in a sense on DS9 already, and the use, and it's not just in his way, also the use of It's Only a Paper Moon in It's Only a Paper Moon, and the use of I'll Be Seeing You, and use of other specific songs at different moments throughout the episodes that James Darren appeared in, I think speak to the intent of the writers to use those songs in a certain way that did stand those episodes out from other episodes of Trek, because it's unusual, as you say. It is a bit weird to throw a 1960s lounge singer into Star Trek.
I have this weird theory that I was thinking about just the other day, and I'd like to hit you with it, get your reaction to it. It's not necessarily related to this episode, but Deep Space Nine more broadly, which is that I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking about new Star Trek hasn't done a lot with Deep Space Nine. Like, they're not doing a lot with Deep Space Nine. How come we aren't getting...
Yeah.
I think they all fear the wrath of Ira. And if they do it wrong, they fear that like Ira's going to like breathe fire and like burn them down.
I disagree with you entirely I don't disagree with you entirely, but I disagree with you. I think that they risk the disappointment of Ira, because I think that they all respect Ira and what he achieved, and I think that they don't want to mess with it. In fact, we heard Mike McMahon almost say exactly this in a recent interview, where he kind of said, look, we tend to leave DS9 a little bit because it was one individual's vision, and they don't want to screw with that. They don't want to screw with that, and it's not because they're afraid that he'll breathe fire and brimstone. I think they don't want to screw it up.
I got you. Yes, I will amend my earlier thoughts to be more in line with what you were saying.
You were joking.
I was playing it up for this show, but I think
exactly.
You're right. Like they just they don't want to mess with Ira.
And to your point about this was Vic teaching Odo to get some game. I mean, what I like about the episode is that it pays off something that's been brewing. Now, you may choose to like or not like that, right? You can say, I don't like the two of them together, or I do like the two of them together.
The actors didn't like it, I can tell you that.
Exactly right. But you are at least paying off something that has been set up in seasons 2 and 3. We've known for a while that this has been there. It's not an episode that brings this out of nowhere, pulls something out of nowhere. It's deeply integral to these characters. Now, you can agree or disagree with the choice that the writers make, but this is something that is it's paying off longtime viewers of the show. It's paying off the work that they've done to set this up, which I appreciated as well.
So, Jamie, you mentioned It's Only a Paper Moon, which in my estimation is one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine. And in fact, when I had sort of the reverse Trek profiles where I invited former guests on to talk to me about episodes that meant a lot to me, that was one of the ones I talked about. And it's particularly because I'm a veteran and I work a lot with other veterans and I'm very involved in veterans issues. I don't talk about that a lot on the show, but that was a big deal to me, that particular episode. So is there anything you want to say about that?
I love this episode. Obviously, I love Vic, so I'm going to love a Vic-heavy episode. And I love the living in the world of 1960s, but with a Star Trek spin. It's notable for the reasons that you talk about, and it's a very relatable episode. And I think Aaron Eisenberg did a phenomenal job. And I mean, I think it's important to me, and it means something to me because it's one of my favorite episodes. I actually have a script from the show. It's the only script I own. It had never, ever occurred to me to buy a script before, but I saw it on eBay by chance, and I went, you know what? I would like to own a copy of that script. It's signed by both James Darren and Aaron Eisenberg, and when I was at the DS9 dinner that I referred to, Aaron Eisenberg was there as well as James Darren, and I got a photo with the two of them, which means a lot to me, because that was especially given that Aaron's no longer with us, and the fact that they trusted those two recurring characters to lead a full episode of a show of that nature is pretty amazing, and I don't think is going to happen anytime soon in Star Trek that is not animated. I believe we may have had an episode in the last series of Lower Decks, which was primarily about a tangential character that shall remain nameless.
Starfleet hero Peanut Hamper.
Peanut Hamper, and I do not wish to talk about that episode and this episode in the same breath, so let us move on. Suffice to say, they showed a lot of trust in Jimmy Darren and Aaron to pull it off, and I think they pulled it off amazingly. It's one of the best episodes of the show. It means a lot to a lot of people, and that's why it means something to me.
Well, Jamie, I've enjoyed our conversation, but the M5 has signaled me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru lightning round. The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5 just for you. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little program. Are you ready, Jamie?
Shoot.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record our guests' responses.
Working.
Vacation planet of your choice. Argelius 2, Casperia Prime, Free Cloud / Stardust City, or the Shoreleaf planet from TOS.
Shoreleaf planet from TOS.
Best Parisi Squares player. Raymond Marr, Makota Archo, or Ensign Bristow.
Ensign Bristow.
Where's your hiding spot on the 1701D? Is it the Port Nacelle Pylon Catwalk, the Jeffries Tube, or Cetacean Ops?
Cetacean Ops for the win.
Which of these is the wildest alien from TAS? The Score, the Capellan Power Cats, or the Pandronians?
The Capellan Power Cats, for sure. Love them.
Who were you jamming with? Picard and his flute, Harry and his clarinet, or Riker and his trombone?
Harry and his clarinet.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed his Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing results.
Jamie, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations, my friend.
Phew. I was worried about that.
And now, the M5, who was
I
analyzed...
I think I had a few dead captains on the floor at the end of that Kobayashi Maru, so I'm hoping they come back to life.
It's okay. The M5 won't hold it against you. And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Jamie is awarded the title of owner and operator of the Intergalactic Parises Squares Referee School on Rigel 4.
So there you go.
Thank you very much. I'll put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that job.
Jamie, please tell people how they can get in touch with you, where they can follow you. I know things are a little bit in flux right now, but where should people go if they want to tell you how wrong you are in your Star Trek opinions?
Yes, I am wrong on Twitter at jmac_ref, JMAC_REF. I'm also on Instagram, Jamie McG as well. So come and find me in either of those places.
Jamie McGregor, my fine Australian friend, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thank you, John, for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun, and I always love chatting to you about Trek and inevitably everything else that comes with it.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your gleeful and giddy communications, your nasty and negative feedback, or selfie photos of yourself that you took at the museum at 8th and Prime to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be hidden away and forgotten along with the Lotus Eaters on Rigel 7. This time, I leave you with a quote from Vic Fontaine, who in the episode His Way said, quote, "By the way, this is a high-class joint. That means coats and ties for the gents, dresses for the ladies. You guys look like a trapeze act." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
Boom diggity, we're done. Was that okay for you?
Yeah, great.
All right, fantastic. So, yeah, I want to ask you about Sammy Davis Jr. So I want to understand how it is that you go from watching James Darren in a sci-fi show to becoming deeply involved with Sammy Davis in a way that, like, my listeners probably don't even understand yet. So take me through that journey.
Well, I mean, once I got the interest, I was kind of like, well, I would like more. I'd like to listen to more albums and listen to, get more material. The problem is, because of who he was and his lifestyle and all that kind of stuff, his estate was not left in the same state that Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, all these famous names had. They had estates that were organized, were putting out material regularly, had, historical, people had historical interest in them and had catalogued their careers in a certain way. That hadn't happened with Sammy.
When did he pass?
1990.
Okay.
So, and I'm looking into this about early 2000s. So I kind of got to a point where I was like, there is no discography of Sammy Davis Jr. I'll create one. I was at university. I was bored. I didn't have anything to do except go to one Star Trek convention. And, I was kind of like, to be honest, I was doing a course in university about databasing anyway. And so I was kind of like, I'll do a discography of Sammy Davis Jr. There is a certain computer program called Brian that allows you to create discographies in a certain jazz fashion. There's a kind of a jazz standard that discographies get created in. And so I used this computer program. I later went to New York to do some research at the Museum of Television and Radio, and I got a huge amount of material from the Reprise and Warner archives. And it just so happens that the person that wrote the computer program I was using was in New York at the same time as I was there, and we caught up, and I met him. So
you came to New York just to finish your discography project from Australia?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I came. I mean, I had a bit of a holiday too, but this is where I became a New York Jets fan. This was like, because I didn't know anything about American football, and this guy goes, I'll show you a game, explain some stuff. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. So, at any rate, I started creating the material, and I created an online repository for a discography of his entire career. And then I can't actually remember what year it was, it got transformed into a website. From just being a database that was online, it got transformed into a website. And then from there, I had some connections with some people that got in touch with me from the Sammy Davis Jr. estate. And so I've been kind of helping them out a little bit as they find their own way into doing things as well. So to the effect that there's a couple of people around the world that are very knowledgeable about Sammy. There's probably about a handful of us. And we try to keep the flame alive.
Would you put yourself in like the shelf of like the top shelf Sammy fans around the world?
I don't think it's any boasting to say yes, because it's a very small group. I mean, to be fair, a lot of people have, he is not as well remembered as others. And I think, that's a pity, and it's something I'm trying to change. And I know the estate's trying to change that as well. But he's not remembered in the same breath as other greats of that era, because of the sheer nothingness that happened to his estate. And it's very difficult to go and buy a Sammy Davis CD, or buy I'm still speaking as if I'm living in the 1990s, or buy Sammy Davis on streaming platforms, or listen to him on streaming platforms. Yes, there is Sammy Davis stuff there, but it's not of good quality necessarily. A lot of his best albums aren't very well presented. A lot of it hasn't been remastered, or what the internet's like. It says remastered on every album, but none of them are actually remastered, right? So it's his legacy hasn't been treated with the same respect, I think, as maybe some other people had.
So what would you say is the best way for someone to get an introduction to Sammy, to say, you know what, I'm interested in this stuff you're talking about, and I'd like to learn a little bit more? What should they do?
The website that I have created is sammydavisjr.info, which I'm sure you'll link to in the show notes.
Absolutely, I will. Mm-hmm.
Which is a good place. There's plenty of stuff there there's reviews of all of his albums. There's a timeline of his career. There's biographical information. There's everything he ever did is basically there, including the database of everything that he recorded and every album that it was recorded on in that jazz style I was talking about. The estate will have a website out in later this year, which I'm excited. Been helping him out a little bit with that, so that will be good. Really look into YouTube as well. See, the thing about Sammy was later in life, I think he became, his star faded somewhat. He became a kind of celebrity, famous for being famous in the late 70s and before a little bit of an 80s revival. But people forget, from like the mid 50s to mid to late 60s, there was nothing this guy couldn't do. And I find him a fascinating character of the time, because he was someone for whom the whole was greater than the sum of the individual parts, right? So he wasn't the best singer, he wasn't the best dancer, he wasn't the best actor, he wasn't the best impressionist, he wasn't the best comic, he wasn't the best musician, he wasn't the best author, but there's no one else in American entertainment history who was at the level he was a singer, at the level he was a dancer, at the level he was an actor, at the level he was an impressionist, a comic, a multi-instrumentalist, headlined Broadway twice, 3 times, wrote a couple of best-selling books, that just doesn't, people get pigeonholed in entertainment industries these days. You won't see anyone like him ever again, I don't think.
My introduction to Sammy Davis Jr. was undoubtedly when he was on All in the Family.
Archie Bunker.
Yeah. Him kissing Archie Bunker, I think, was the first recollection that I have, because I was a kid when that show was on the air, and my dad, who pretty much was Archie Bunker. And I say that with love, but he was Archie Bunker. He watched that show because he loved Archie, and I would watch it with him because he was my dad, and it's what you do. And that was, I think, the first recollection I had of who Sammy was. And it was really wild. We were talking about this a little bit before. You had sent me some song lists, some Spotify lists, some Apple Music playlists, and I was listening to them. And as listeners to my show will know, I live in Las Vegas, and I was driving down the Strip listening to Sammy. And I just had a very sort of inception moment that I'm listening to Sammy talking about playing in Las Vegas while I'm in Las Vegas driving down the Strip. And it was really wild. And it was a real great...
You were probably not more than a kilometer or a couple of miles away from where that happened.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was very, very much right there because I remembered where I was and why I was on the Strip and where I was going, because those of us who live here, we never go down there. So I was down there for a specific purpose, and I knew exactly where I was. And it was just great because I have, besides a love of Star Trek, obviously, I have an irrational love of Las Vegas, this adopted city in this bizarre state that I've moved to, and I have an irrational love for the place. And it was just a great moment where like everything sort of collapsed into one moment of joy. Was listening to Sammy's the Buddy Rich album as I'm driving down the Strip, blasting that thing on my stereo in Las Vegas. And I just wanted to thank you for making that moment happen indirectly.
Happy to. I mean, it's again, small Venn diagrams, my friend, small Venn diagrams of interests colliding. But when they do, it's great, and I've got a lot to be thankful for to Deep Space Nine and to James Darren. I will say I got an opportunity to sit with him in the Vegas convention center for quite some time. He gave me a lot of his time and we had a chat, and I was able to explain to him, hey, effectively, thanks to you, a huge amount of Sammy's career has been catalogued because James Darren knew, as you would know, James Darren knew Sammy quite well. He was, they all had birthdays around the same time, and they would hang out a lot. There's a couple of photos of Sammy and James Darren together, and he was telling me stories and that kind of stuff. And I think he got a kick out of the fact that I was able to say, hey, thank you, because what you did on the show actually has, in a roundabout fashion, led to the continuation of the cataloging and some of the legacy of Sammy being recorded, which otherwise would not have happened.
Yeah, what a blessing. I mean, he must have been really thrilled to hear that.
He was lovely about it. I mean, he's a lovely guy.
So I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but at my last job, my office was right up the block from where the old Moulin Rouge was. Oh, yeah. Okay. And the
Moulin Rouge being the African-American hotel and casino, right?
Yeah, where Sammy had to stay, even when he was performing at the Sands.
Not true.
Not true.
So, not true. No, this is one of those Las Vegas myths, I'm afraid. I have to bust. Wow, this is going well into the bonus material. So, it is not. He definitely stayed in the African-American hotels during most of his time in Vegas in the early days. So he traveled to Vegas many times with his dad and uncle as part of a troupe called the Will Marston Trio. And when they played Vegas, they definitely had to be on that side of town. So he knew all about it, and he would go and stay there. In 1954, he signed one of the first deals that allowed him to stay on the Strip at the hotel that he was performing in, at the place called the Last Frontier. Might have been I think it was the Last Frontier by then. And he had the run of the place, so he could actually go into the casino, not the swimming pool, but he could go into the casino. He could go into all the areas of the casino, and it was one of the first such deals. Lena Horne had been able to stay at a hotel prior to that, but Sammy was the first person that had kind of full run of the place as a entertainer there. Now that's 1954. That is 6 years before any of the Rat Pack stuff started happening. It's before Sinatra and the Sands and all that kind of stuff. And once he had that deal, he wasn't going to go back to staying on the other side of town, right? So he was able to stay from 54 onwards. He was able to stay wherever he wanted in town. And the stories about Frank Sinatra getting him to stay in this, they're all made up, unfortunately. By that point,
I never heard any of those stories. Yeah, I never heard.
Yeah, no, there's stuff saying that Sinatra definitely opened doors, and in particular in places like Miami and New York, that definitely happened, but not in Las Vegas.
So they,
there you go.
When I moved here, the Moulin Rouge was still standing, but they had it bulldozed, so it's gone now. It's just a flat piece of nothing. And but
having said that, I mean, Sammy would go back to the Moulin Rouge because that's where all the fun was. And in fact, even a lot of the white entertainers would go back to the Moulin Rouge because that's where all the fun was. That's where all of the people who actually had any talent were doing their stuff in the wee small hours of the evening. After all of the shows on the Strip had closed, they'd all go back to the Moulin Rouge, and amazing place.
Well, thank you for educating me about that. That's just something you hear, and I knew about the history of the Moulin Rouge, and especially because I used to work 300 feet up the road from where it was. Right. I spent 7 years working at that place, and I remembered when they took it down. It was quite a thing. Yeah. But a little piece of history that's gone, and I think that's one of the strange things about Vegas is that we like to blow stuff up and pave over things here.
Yes.
Some cities they're like, this is a historic landmark, right? We got to save it, preserve it, right? Turn it into a museum. Vegas, they're like, no, nuke it, turn it into a party, serve drinks, right? Detonate it, and we're gonna have a party,
make it better.
Build something new.
It reminds me of the remake of Ocean's 11 when Elliot Gould's in that scene and he says, Terry Benedict muscled me out, pushed me out of my casino. He's going to blow it up to make way for some gaudy monstrosity, And I remember thinking, yeah, mate, like yours wasn't a gaudy monstrosity, It's this great line.
Yeah.
It's so,
you have the classy place, right?
Yeah, you had the classy place. Yeah, exactly.
I was trying to explain this to someone the other day. I said, Vegas is like the only place where you can walk into like a high-end casino, right? You can walk into like a spendy place, and you can see some guy wearing a tux next to a guy in flip-flops and board shorts at the same table, right? And they're in the same place at the same time, playing the same game.
That's egalitarianism for you, my friend. The cards are a leveler, aren't they? Now, you said that you wanted me to answer some Sammy questions. You're going to put them through the whatever, and then you can edit them into the back of the show at how you wish. Is that
Yeah. We'll do that after with the episode, I think.
Okay.
Is that okay? Sweet. Or do you want to talk about that stuff now?
Yeah. No. Just, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like it. And I just wanted to know how you wanted to do that.
Yeah, and I have been listening to some of the playlists.
That's cool. You're like, that's where the Sands was. He was 300 meters that way.
Yeah. And I thought for like half a second, this is the kind of nerd I am. I thought for half a second, I was thinking, now, I would actually like to find out I forget the name of the room. He actually says what room they were in. I could actually wonder if I could figure out like where that room is now. And where that would be.
I hate to tell you that having now been to Vegas a few times, I have done that and worked out exactly where it is. It's in the Venetian. Thank you. It is in the Venetian. I went to see if I could work out, and you can kind of stand roughly where it is, but it doesn't exist anymore.
Right. And I bet it's like a men's room or like a Victoria's Secret in the mall or something, right?
It just got bulldozed and replaced with the Venetian. So there's a kind of space where it used to be partially, and they actually have a little, you would have seen it. There's a little Rat Pack thing directly outside the Venetian, which is an homage to the Sands, and it's got a little thing with their footprints.
Oh, nice.
the 5 Rat Pack people. There's a little footprints thing.
Oh, that's cool. Awesome. I have not checked that out, so I gotta go down there and check that out. No, I was driving.
Next time I'm around, I'll show it to you.
Yeah, I was driving down the strip when I was listening to that, and it was completely incidental, by the way. It turned out that I had run out of podcasts, and so when I run out of podcasts, I switch over to music. And so that's kind of how that happens. And I said, no, I'm very deliberate in my podcasts.
Did you like the album?
Oh, it was fantastic. What's not to like?
Yeah.
Right? What's not to like? You know, it's amazing. Right. So, and you know, it was hard for me to imagine that they're pressing the record button at 5 a.m. on that, right? That's mind blowing.
Well, I thought for a bit there, with our technical issues, we might be the same. So I'm glad.
No, we are all good. We are all good with that. You reminded me of something I actually had when I was a kid, and I hadn't thought of this in a really long time. But when I was a Ute, I had this Star Trek TOS sort of play along, read along comic book that came with an album. So it had a
LP,
an LP, a 33 LP. That you would play, and it had a comic book that was the size of the album cover, so it was a one set, and you would play it, and they had voices, and it wasn't the original cast; it was other people, but they did have Lieutenant Moress and Lieutenant Arix, so yes. they had Arix and Moress and all of that in there, so it was like more like animated series type stuff, and I remember it was this really wild story where this like alien being takes over the ship, and this one of the crewmen figures out like how to play this musical instrument to make the alien subside in its designs, and they connected through music, and this guy was like basically jamming on the keyboards on the bridge of the Enterprise talking to this alien, and the art was cool. You know, really impressive to me as a kid. I loved it. So you just brought back that memory for me talking about your Star Trek.
Lieutenant Arix would have made a fantastic concert pianist, I would have thought. He would have been able to do things others couldn't. That's
in fact,
what a story. Have you been on eBay and looked that up anytime lately?
I have not. I don't actually have a record player that I could play that on. Right. It would just be for the collector value of it. But don't worry,
John. It's probably going for either $5 or $5,000. One of the two.
Well, I will tell you this. This I may put in the bonus material. I don't know. I'm always a little squishy when I'm talking about episodes I haven't released yet. But I have a guest coming up who wanted to talk about some Star Trek comic books.
Okay.
They are not available electronically in Comixology or any of the online platforms. I actually had to go onto eBay and like bid on comic books to get copies of these comic books to read in preparation for the show.
You, sir, are dedicated to your craft.
So I don't know what order these episodes will come out in. I have no idea. So maybe people have already heard that one and they'll have heard that. I don't know, because I never know about my episode order. But anyway, talking too much about me. We're here to talk about you. So let's get back on track here. Oh my God. All right, I'm going to cut that out. I'm talking about a Trek Profiles t-shirt. Jamie is wearing one as we're recording this. How awesome is that?
There you go.
Now, Jamie, I don't know what
did you watch any of these ones that I listed?
Jamie, I watched them all. I'm serious.
I believe you.
So I have this book, actually, that I don't know if you've ever seen this notebook. No. I actually won this at the Star Trek convention when I defeated our mutual friend.
John, it's no cruise, but I appreciate it. Go on.
I defeated Jim Morehouse, Claire Little, and people who know more about Star Trek than me.
The spelling?
In the Star Trek spelling bee, right? And there's audio of this, so I'm not making up stories. And I went 3 rounds in the final round against a co-champion, and it was a tie. Neither of us could defeat the other in the spelling bee, so we each won our own prizes. They gave us 2 gift bags, and I got this notebook, which I had never used until I decided to start doing Trek Profiles. And the only purpose of this notebook is recording my notes as I rewatch the episodes.
Fair
so
enough.
that's the only thing I use it for. It's a little ritual that I have. It's also very handy because when an episode comes up that like I just watched, I'm not going to rewatch something I just watched. So I already have the notes, so I can just go back and look at what I thought last time, and maybe I might have a new spin on something.
Endure. Anyway, that was kind of my take on that. Do you know what I'm saying?
So the prophets are essentially Badgie. May I teach you a lesson?
Yes, that's you've summarized. Sorry, I should have. Yes, I should have been more succinct.
I'm sorry that I did that to you, Jamie. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. You make a good point.
I literally made that up just now, and I was like, "Oh, the prophets are Badgie. May I teach you a lesson?"
and I think Cisco learned his lesson.
And so one of the problems that leads me to is when you're rewatching episodes, things will occur to you that make you think of the characters differently. And in this particular episode, I want to throttle Bashir and punch him in his stupid face. He's genetically enhanced. How can you possibly engage in this activity being genetically enhanced? You're a jerk, you know?
Yes.
There's no way O'Brien can beat you. And it's not due to your skill. It's due to the fact that your parents paid some alien to inject you with a bunch of gene therapy.
Yes.
It changes the episode for me, honestly, knowing that. Because I have this idea that I want to keep the show internally consistent and all of that. Knowing what I know about Bashir, I think not a good guy. But and I like him a lot less.
To be fair, John... To be fair, season 1 to 3 Bashir isn't great. No, even ignoring the show's internal inconsistencies. But he does. It gets better. You know, and in fact, it is mostly season 4 where some of that starts to change. I think when he gets a little bit more perspective about his, the episode where he tries to cure the disease and fails. I often think about that episode a lot. In the sense that he fails, but he kind of succeeds in a certain sense, and I think that has an effect on his character as the show goes on. But no, you are right. Yes, this damn the writers in what season do we find that out about?
It was after this. It was after this.
It's like season 6. Do they know what they are doing and how they are ruining earlier episodes of the show when they write this stuff? Clearly not. Curse them.
So I don't think I'll put this in the episode, but whenever it comes to will they or won't they storylines, I think that my prediction for Picard season 3, not having seen anything, is that whatever happens between Picard and Bev, the shippers out there are going to lose their minds. Whether they do, they'll lose their minds. And if they don't, they're going to lose their minds.
They'll lose their minds.
Whatever happens, they're going to go berserk. That is my prediction for that.
Fair enough. I can't wait to find out.
Me neither. I almost feel that like all the Picard season 3 hype is like almost setting the bar too high. Because like the hype is real. Like it is not like bogus. There are people that...
I hope it pays off. I hope it pays off this time.
Do you remember the Capellan Power Cats?
I do. I do not know any of the planets you referred to.
You don't know any of those planets. So...
Oh, sorry. I do. I don't know any of the ensigns. I didn't know any of the people. So the Parisi Squares players, I did not know any of them.
They are all canonical names. Those are not names I made up.
I'm sure, yeah.
And they were all referenced in various Star Trek episodes as very famous Parisi Squares players.
Wow.
So Ensign Bristow was like someone on, I think, Voyager, who was known as like a really good Parisi Squares player, and his name is mentioned as like really, really good. Mm-hmm. It might be Voyager, it might be another series, but he's mentioned as someone who's on the ship who's really good. Makota Archo, this one's interesting, the only Klingon to ever become a full-time Parisi Squares player. Like a professional, he got into the professional league, whatever that is.
The professional league, the pros.
Yeah, he was a pro Parisi Squares player as a Klingon. And that was mentioned in some episode. I'd have to look it up. And Raymond Marr, same deal, was mentioned in some episode as a serious, very, very famous Parisi Squares player. But as for this one, let me look this up right quick. Hold on. So Casperia Prime was the only inhabited planet of its star system, and it is the vacation capital of the Horvian cluster. And Jadzia Dax wanted to take Worf there on their honeymoon. So that's Casperia Prime, right? And then you've got Argelius.
I know Free Cloud.
Argelius 2 is from TOS. Wolf in the Fold, where Scotty, right? Yeah. But like the whole planet is like, there can be no sexual jealousy. Like anybody can sleep with anybody, right? It's all that.
And Gene Roddenberry planet.
Yes, the Gene Roddenberry planet, right? And then of course you've got the Shoreleaf planet from TOS, which everyone remembers. Yep. So the TAS though, my favorite was the Score. I'd have picked those. Those are the bird guys. The yellow bird guys. Okay. Yeah, they're crazy.
Yep.
They're
I didn't recognize them. I did recognize the other two, but yeah. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. It's good fun. I mean, I think we covered more to the point. Are you happy? Like we covered a ton of ground.
Yeah. No, it was all good, man. It's all good. I mean, yeah. I don't really like my recording studio here in the closet, but it is what it is,
We'll get you out of the closet one day.
It is.
I think it'll be an interesting editing job for you to do. I know you do it meticulously, and you please take out all of my ums, and as I know you do. But I just want to make this very clear. You gave me 15 minutes of instructions at the beginning. Here's my instructions at the end. Feel free to heavily edit if I'm not making sense or I am talking nonsense. I not only give you permission, I expect it.
No, it's what I do.
Thank you very much.
It's important to me that all my guests look good. I don't want anyone to come on the show and feel like they had a bad experience, and I don't want anyone to come on the show and when they hear their episode, they're like, oh, I can't believe I did that, or how terrible, it's because that helps me get more guests,